On the evening of February 12th, 2025, Barry Moore, a man deeply embedded in the criminal world of West Dublin, made his way to a house located on Sheep Hill Avenue. Moore had known the Hennessy brothers, Jason, Devon, and Brandon, for most of his life. Their families had long been tied together through mutual interests and criminal activities. As he walked towards the front door of the Hennessy family residence, Moore was under the impression that he would be entering a familiar space for a routine conversation. At first, everything seemed normal. Moore entered through the black steel door of the house, greeted by Jade Hennessy, a female relative of the notorious crime family. What he didn't know was that his visit was part of a far more sinister plan. Despite their long history, Moore had recently come under suspicion by the Hennessy brothers. He had become a target of their paranoia after a police raid on a field in Cordoff, where the authorities seized firearms and a stash of drugs linked to the gang. The Hennessy brothers were convinced that someone within their circle had tipped off the police, and they believed Moore was the source. As Moore stepped into the dimly lit hallway, he was met by Jason Hennessy Jr., the middle brother, and his associates, including Devon and Brandon. The conversation quickly turned tense, and Moore began to feel the familiar weight of suspicion in the air. What began as a seemingly innocent discussion soon spiraled into something far more sinister. The atmosphere shifted when Jason Hennessy Jr. suddenly grabbed Moore's phone out of his hand, his eyes burning with suspicion. Moore, momentarily stunned, tried to understand what was happening. Before he could react, Jason punched him square in the face. It all happened so quickly that Moore had little time to process the sudden explosion of violence. "Tell the truth," Jason growled, though Moore had no idea what he was supposed to confess. The Hennessy brothers were convinced he had betrayed them, but Moore denied any wrongdoing. Still, in their eyes, he had already been labeled a rat, and there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. Kenneth Fitzsimons, a trusted associate of the gang, retrieved a 5-foot steel bar from somewhere in the house. With brutal force, he swung it at Moore's legs, hitting him repeatedly. Moore collapsed to the ground as the pain seared through his body. The beatings continued as Brandon Hennessy, the youngest of the brothers, grabbed the bar and continued assaulting Moore, targeting his head, chest, and arms. With every blow, Moore's body seemed to break down further, but he had no way to defend himself. The pain intensified as the Hennessy brothers escalated their brutal attack. Jason Jr. retrieved a branding iron, not just any branding iron, but one custom-made with the word "rat" engraved into it. Holding the red-hot tool in his hand, Jason threatened Moore, saying, "He'll talk after this." The brothers' twisted idea of justice had reached a new, horrifying level. The next few moments blurred into agony for Moore as Jason lit a camping stove, placing the branding iron over the flame. The heat grew unbearable, and as Jason approached with the searing metal, Moore knew something far worse was about to happen. The branding iron was pressed against his stomach, its hot surface searing into his skin. Moore screamed in pain, but the attack didn't stop. It was applied not once, but 6 times, each time more excruciating than the last. Jason demanded to know who had set him up, asking about an incident at Costa Coffee that he believed involved betrayal. Moore, writhing in pain, continued to insist that he had no knowledge of any such plan. But his protests fell on deaf ears. The Hennessy brothers were no longer listening, only seeking revenge for a perceived betrayal. The pain from the branding iron was still fresh when the door suddenly swung open and a new figure entered the room. Dean Fitzsimons, Kenneth's son. Dean, a trusted associate deeply involved with the gang's activities, rode into the room on a Surin electric motorbike. Without a moment's hesitation, Dean revved the engine and drove straight toward Moore, running over his legs. Moore groaned in pain as Dean laughed maniacally. "I've been waiting for you," Dean mocked as he dismounted the bike. The attack had already reached unimaginable heights, but the violence was far from over. Dean picked up the steel bar and continued the assault. The pain in Moore's body seemed endless, as each hit felt more devastating than the last. Dean then grabbed an axe, but instead of using the blade, he began swinging the blunt end of the weapon. The strikes were brutal and unrelenting, each blow landing with bone-crushing force. Moore, too weak to defend himself, could do nothing but endure the onslaught. After what seemed like an eternity, the gang's violence escalated once again. Devon Hennessy, the eldest of the three brothers, suggested something even more degrading. He proposed pulling down Moore's tracksuit bottoms and assaulting him with a stick. Fortunately, this suggestion was never acted upon, and the attack slowly wound down. But the psychological torment was far from over. The Hennessy brothers decided to finish the ordeal by erasing all traces of the conversation they had just violently forced out of Moore. They wiped his phone, deleting all messages that could potentially implicate them. With the final act of humiliation complete, the gang let Moore go, leaving him battered, bruised, and with the branding iron marks still fresh on his skin. Stumbling out of the house, Moore managed to get to his car. Every step felt like an insurmountable challenge, and he could barely keep himself upright. He somehow drove to a relative's house where he collapsed, unable to speak or move. His family quickly realized something horrific had happened. Emergency services were called, and Moore was rushed to the hospital. Doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Moore. His injuries were extensive, burns covering 3 to 4% of his skin, deep bruising, possible fractures, and severe swelling. But Moore was alive, though the emotional and physical trauma he had endured would haunt him for the rest of his life. On February 13, 2025, Moore was able to provide a full statement to the police, recounting every agonizing detail of the attack. His testimony, along with the overwhelming evidence from the scene, allowed the authorities to move quickly. They obtained search and arrest warrants for several properties linked to the Hennessy gang and began their operation to dismantle the criminal enterprise that had terrorized West Dublin for years. At 7 a.m. on February 15, 2025, more than 100 Garda officers launched coordinated raids on multiple properties across Blanchardstown and Corduff. The operation was swift and efficient. One of the primary targets was the Hennessy family home, the same house where Moore had been tortured just days earlier. Armed officers forced their way inside, clearing the property in minutes. In the backyard, investigators discovered a small garden shed, believed to be the location where Moore had been interrogated. The gang's entire operation was built on intimidation, violence, and fear. But with Moore's statement and the extensive raids, the tide had turned. By the end of the operation, all 5 men involved in the attack on Moore had been arrested. They were charged with multiple serious crimes, including assault causing serious harm, false imprisonment, and the production of weapons. The charges carried the potential for life sentences. As the case made its way to court, the accused gang members remained defiant, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Dean Fitzsimons became aggressive, shouting at officers and later apologizing to the judge. Jason Hennessy also interrupted the proceedings, angrily denying ownership of several vehicles linked to the gang's activities. Despite their protests, Judge Paula Murphy denied them bail, ruling that they posed a significant threat to public safety. The men were remanded in custody and sent to Cloverhill Prison. The once feared Hennessy gang, which had controlled West Dublin through violence and fear, was now on the brink of collapse. Their reign of terror had come to an end, and their paranoia and reckless decisions had ultimately destroyed them. The downfall of the Hennessy gang marked the end of an era of terror in Dublin's criminal underworld. Jason Hennessy Sr., their father, had built an empire based on fear, drug trafficking, and violent feuds. But his murder in 2023 had set off a chain of events that led to the gang's eventual collapse. His assassination had been chaotic, a botched attempt at taking down the Hennessy family that resulted in the deaths of both Jason Sr. and his would-be assassin, Tristan Sherry. With their father gone, the Hennessy brothers tried to assume control of the gang, but their violence grew more erratic and reckless. They turned on their own, attacking and torturing one of their closest associates. In the end, their paranoia and desperation led them to make fatal mistakes. They attacked Barry Moore, a man they had trusted for years, and left behind a trail of evidence that would bring them to justice. The Hennessy brothers had once been a powerful force in Dublin's criminal world, but their empire was crumbling from within. The events surrounding Barry Moore's brutal attack were the final straw. The once feared Hennessy name was now synonymous with chaos, and their downfall was inevitable. The last remnants of their criminal legacy were being dismantled by the very law enforcement they had once evaded for so long. With the Hennessy brothers behind bars, West Dublin began to breathe a little easier. The long-standing cycle of fear, violence, and intimidation that had plagued the area was finally coming to an end. While Moore's scars would never fully heal, his bravery in coming forward had helped bring down a dangerous criminal syndicate and put an end to the Hennessy gang's reign of terror. For the first time in years, the residents of Corduff and Blanchardstown could feel a sense of hope. The Hennessy gang's grip on the neighborhood had been shattered, and with it, the influence of one of Dublin's most feared criminal families. But for Moore, the road to recovery would be long, and the psychological scars of the night he spent in the hands of the Hennessy brothers would remain with him forever. That is our video for today. Like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments section what you think of today's story, and I will see you on the next video.